Welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and today we're digging into my message from Sunday, which was about how we have two masters in our lives and sometimes multiple masters in our lives, and what it means to serve God and what it means to not serve wealth or mammon. So we'll be digging into that, and so let's get into the conversation.
Sounds good. Let's get started. You talked about how we often put so many things on a pedestal.
Yes.
And there's no way we can live up to that.
Yeah.
And I just like how you did that. And it's not necessarily money.
Right.
Again, you kind of talked about that this week.
Yeah.
Not necessarily money. It's your job. It's what are you putting in place of God?
Right.
When really all of it
Yes.
should work together.
Right.
The way I think of it, it all should work together towards us serving God. Mm-hmm. And the way that we do that is by treating people the way God wants us to in our jobs, or making decisions based on what's morally right, or what's
Right. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I want to twist that a little bit and say that it should flow out of us, out of God's love. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't move towards, it should be from. Because of my faith in God, and because of how I view the world, because of how God views the world, I do this. And it should not flow towards faithfulness. It should be like the outcome.
It is interesting, how God calls us to live. We're doing that leadership course at work.
Yeah.
How God calls us to live is totally how to be a highly effective person. If you read Stephen Covey's book, all of his principles are just God's principles on how to carry your life. And it's really interesting to me. People always say, oh, well, we don't need that part of our lives because we can do it on our own by ourselves. But really, the most effective people are the ones that use God's principles in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so you use God, like you said, you let it flow through you. And how much better can you be at your job? How much more money can you make?
Right.
How much, if that's still important to you, as long as you're not worshiping, as long as you're not putting money first, it can help you do all these things.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, like I said on Sunday, money is a tool or a resource for us to use to bring about the glory of God in our lives. I did not intend to put this in the sermon, but this conversation reminds me when I was a freshman in college at Aberdeen, we were basically adopted by a family. Their names were Jared and Dodie. And they would have us over at their house once a week for meals and for Bible study. And we were talking one night about wealth, and they're just like, well, we both work at jobs where we make a lot of money, and it's not that we've done that on purpose, but is this bad? And we're like, no, because look at how you're using the wealth that you've gained. You are opening your home to another adult and 6 college students to have a Bible study together. If you were using your jobs to gain all this money and then, hoarding it for yourself, or, letting people into your house, but dear God, don't touch anything, that's a different story.
Right.
In that instance, your house can become your master, but yet you're opening it up to college students.
Right.
You're using it to the glory of God. You are, that's the healthy relationship. You can have a well-paying job, you can have a high-paying position, but then you have the fruitfulness of what's happening because of that.
Right.
You're giving to the church faithfully and sacrificially. We had an on-campus Bible study. It was 2 Bible studies. We had one on campus that was for anybody, and then this other one was kind of the leadership of that on-campus Bible study. And they bought us resources, they bought us books, they bought us shirts, they bought us things to make this thing go that we didn't have to worry about or fundraise for. We just we had those resources at our fingertips because they were given to us by a very generous donor. But just that question, that conversation that we had has just always loomed over me, because my wife's a teacher and I'm a pastor. We're not, we're paid well, out of our salaries, we still make enough to be fine, and then, give to the church or donate to this or that. Or there's a young man that I've known for a long time that works for Navigators now on campus. He's in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And we are supporters of him. We are using what we have to the glory of God, and we're striving for that healthy relationship with financial resources, and to not let them be a master, but to let money have its proper place as, again, a tool for us to use.
Another perfect example of that is my uncle, who we both know, who's been a real estate agent in Sioux Falls for
Yes.
forever.
Yep.
And has done very, very well. And he's been on the church camping board. He's been on. He supports the Methodist Church, in all sorts of different areas.
Yep. Yep. Camping board is how I first met him, by the way.
And so just watching those types of people, where they do so well, and you would never know it. And just interacting with them.
Yes.
That's what God wants us to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I've watched your uncle lead camps for Onset, and just getting to watch him interact with people. I mean, you just never know that, he is who he is.
Most genuine person I've ever met.
Correct.
Got to be right up there anyway.
Correct. I am behind that 100%.
So you had, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but you had teased the word mammon in our last podcast.
Yes.
But then I believe that you did not use it in this week's sermon.
Did not at all use the word mammon. As I've revealed in the podcast before, Tuesday is kind of my day where I do a lot of research for the sermon. Thursday is the day that I really write. And as I was writing this week, it just kind of, I had a pretty good chunk on it in the sermon, and it just kind of got bumped lower and lower and lower, and then it got bumped to the, that's the cut for time conversation. So I did not use the word mammon. The word mammon comes from Jesus' words in the Gospels when he says, you cannot serve money, you cannot serve God or wealth. The word that he uses for wealth is not the typical word that he would have used. He used the word mammon, which is Aramaic. The New Testament is written predominantly in Greek, aside from some of the things that get verbally said, because Aramaic would have been the spoken language of the time. So Jesus chooses to use the word mammon in this instance. And I was doing some background work on that on Tuesday when I was doing my research day. And the only places where mammon is mentioned is here in the Gospel of Matthew, and in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus says the same thing again in what we call the Sermon on the Plain. So Matthew's Gospel has the Sermon on the Mount. Luke's Gospel has the Sermon on the Plain. And in the Sermon on the Plain and the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus presents this teaching that you cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and wealth. The fancy academic word for when that happens is hapax legomenon, when a word gets used one time. And so this would almost be a New Testament hapax legomenon, because Jesus does not use this word any other place than in this set of teachings. Like when Jesus talks about, rendering unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and he's talking about money in that instance, that's not the word he uses. And so I found that significant to talk about the concept of mammon. Mammon is an Aramaic word that meant wealth, but it also meant property. It also meant possessions. And at its heart, it was not a derogatory word. It was just the word you used, but it took on a derogatory meaning throughout its usage in history. That if you were serving mammon, you were doing something wrong. Or if you were pursuing mammon, you were doing something wrong. And that's kind of how Jesus uses it in the Gospels, and that's how it has been used ever since then. When I was in seminary, I did seminary in 3 years, which you can do without taking too heavy of a load. I did classes pretty much all year round for 3 years, between doing classes at Sioux Falls Seminary, doing classes at St. Paul School of Theology in Kansas City to get my United Methodist stuff, because Sioux Falls Seminary is not a United Methodist seminary. I had to take a preaching class in seminary, and one of the sermons got preached directly to me because of my pursuit of mammon, because I was doing my degree in 3 years. Someone chose to spend 15 minutes. He looked at me almost the entire time. So there was really no wiggle room as to what was going on, but that sermon was pointed at me because I was doing my degree in 3 years. And this person just felt that that was not the right way to do it, that I wasn't getting my full experience out of seminary because I was doing it so fast. I think he did it maybe in 6 or 7 years because he was working. He had several side projects as well as being in seminary, and I had seminary and then a pretty much full-time job outside of seminary. And we just looked at the world very differently, and he looked at the way that I was doing seminary and decided that the reason why I was doing that was because of Mammon, because I wanted to get through my education as fast as possible to go make money. And I was told that I couldn't serve God in Mammon. I couldn't serve God and still finish my MDiv in 3 years, despite the fact that almost my entire graduating class did their MDivs in 3 years. And so that was the first time that I was ever introduced to the word Mammon. That's the first time I had ever heard it, because again, it's not really a, in the world. I mean, I was telling Eric off mic, when I was in college, I took Greek, and so I studied the New Testament a lot more than I studied the Old Testament, and that continued through seminary because the United Methodist Church does not have a language requirement for pastors to take. You can take one, obviously, because I took Greek. You can take both if you want to, and the world of Hebrew is a fantastic world, but it's just not for me. And so that wasn't a word I was familiar with at all. After I heard this sermon, I couldn't ignore it because I'd just been accused basically of something that I didn't know what was going on. And then I did some more research into the idea of what Mammon really is and what Mammon really stands for. And what Jesus is saying is that we cannot serve God and still be ultimately concerned about those things that we can put our trust in that are not God. And they're everywhere in our lives. Stewardship is more than just our money. Stewardship is everything. Stewardship and this idea of not serving two masters is that anything that we put in put our trust in other than God can be a master, can be Mammon. It can be our car. It can be that status that we get by driving a certain vehicle. If you look at it, I mean, I watch probably too much Instagram reels, and I see people with Teslas that are just, their identity as a Tesla driver becomes the primary part of who they are as a person. It can be, it can be our political ideology. If we put our more trust in our chosen political party rather than putting our trust in God, we've made that a master. I mentioned a long time ago that I was a part of a fraternity in college called Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia. It was a music fraternity, and we had one guy that was just all of who he was. Like every article of clothing this man wore every day was a Phi Mu Alpha sweatshirt. A different one, but it was everything that he wore. He had made that a master, and that's terribly sad because this person he was my big brother in the fraternity, and he had so much to offer people beyond Sinfonia, but he just couldn't. It was his master. It was the master he was choosing to serve, and God says we're better than that.
So freeing,
right?
All this stuff on earth that we don't have to worry about. We do. We spend so much time worrying about how much money we have, what the government's doing, all that kind of stuff. We don't have to.
Yeah. Hold that thought for 2 weeks, Eric.
Sorry,
that's where we're going.
So we all have these other masters in our life, right? What do you struggle with?
That's a great question. I am one that, especially in college, and I'm still not free of this, but if I could win, that's what I was going to go for. Definitely the shadow side of who I am as a person is the idea of competition and being better. As many college students do, I had a roommate, and we were both in the same degree program, and we were both in some of the same classes. And if I could beat him in a class, I would. So
interesting.
Yep. If I could get a better grade, if I could have my paper done faster and better, and at the time I was like, oh yeah, this is driving me to be a better student. No, this is driving me to be not a very nice person. And so that's really, and I'm still not free of that because I will look at what other pastors are doing in their churches, and I will play the comparison game of, what either, and it can go either way. I will either look at someone and say, I'm not doing that well enough and I'm a bad pastor, or I will say, I'm doing that so much better than you and you can kiss my shoes. So,
Well, I think we struggle with that just as churches in general.
yeah. Oh,
Like,
yeah,
you
definitely.
You look at churches around the community or in the area or whatever and be like, God, I
Correct.
wish we were doing that as well as they are.
Yep.
Or they've got this many people in church, why don't we?
Yep.
What are they
Yep.
doing differently than
Right.
we are?
Yes. Yep. Or we have this many and they have that many, and oh man, aren't we so great?
Yep, exactly.
That is something that I have to be on guard of a lot.
What have you done to work through that?
Sometimes eating crow of just, not necessarily sticking my foot in it, but sometimes sticking my foot in it. And so what I've had to learn how to do is say to another trusted friend or colleague, I'm struggling with this person. Can you help me see what I'm not seeing? Basically, rather than just writing them off as a bad pastor, or rather than writing them off as annoying, or writing them off as, somehow less than. I've had to ask the question and be very intentional, especially when I find myself at odds with someone, of saying, there has to be more to this person or more to this church. And so I'm going to ask someone that I know and love and trust, what am I missing in the midst of all of this? It requires a level of vulnerability that I'm not, that's hard, but yet it is the right thing to do. And I've actually grown to appreciate some people that I've had a hard time with by using that very approach.
Well, and self-reflection just in general is so
Oh,
hard.
yeah, definitely.
Looking at not thinking yourself as the best person in the whole world is not easy.
Right.
Or being okay with not being the best at stuff and understanding your strengths and weaknesses.
Yep, definitely.
And here I'm really good at this stuff,
Yep.
and here I'm not so good at this stuff, and
Yep.
being okay with that.
Yes. Yep.
Because you're going to be doing the same, like you said with your roommate, in the same major, in the same program.
Yeah.
So then you feel like you should be just as strong as him or stronger than him at everything.
Yes.
And what I struggle with, because I have some of the same problems,
Sure.
is being okay with my strengths are maybe stronger than than him, because he doesn't have the same strengths,
Right.
or that person doesn't have the same strengths.
Yep.
And yeah, that can be hard.
And sometimes it has taken apologies because I was that competitive jerk in the face of someone. That level of competition had to die.
Right.
And still needs to die as I am a pastor. What do you find yourself struggling with when it comes to serving multiple masters?
For me, it's work. And not just as an engineer. And I don't even think it's because of trying to make more money. But I'm one of those who just likes to do and be productive. And what I feel is productive is working on stuff.
Sure.
So whether that be on the farm or on the house or at work, as an engineer,
Yeah.
like I wear a lot of different hats, or even here at the church.
Yeah.
Like I like to do things, and I find myself that takes up so much time. Well, and honestly, like we were talking about before, sometimes I struggle with time management.
Sure. Yep.
Part of it's because I just like to talk to people and I'm a people person, and
Well,
it
yeah.
takes a lot of freaking time.
Yep.
But anyway, I have always struggled to find a good time to do a Bible study because I'll get to work and really I'll get to work and just dig into work.
Yeah.
And then I work, I find myself, I get home, we have supper, and then I go work on something else.
Yep.
And then by like 8, 9 o'clock, I just don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
I just want to go sit down and shut my brain off and go to bed, essentially. What I have found is I can focus better in the morning and what I'm trying to do is make what should be a priority
Yeah.
by doing a Bible study right when I get to work. DGR is a great place in that we can, as long as we get our work done, no one says a word.
Sure.
And so if your work hours are 7 to 5 or 8 to 6 or 8 to 5 or whatever, it's very flexible.
Yeah. That's
And
awesome.
so I have found that I perform better in the morning, mentally,
Yeah.
and think clearer, and my brain isn't completely shut off. And so I have taken what I thought was going to be an evening thing, a Bible study. I've moved that to like 7 o'clock in the morning. So go to work, exercise. We have a fitness room at work.
Nice.
Exercise, and then dig into Bible study. And so even before I dig into work, because I feel like as soon as I dig in, I don't get back to it.
Correct.
I go from work to working at home to farming to whatever, and just never get to it.
Yep.
Now I make that a priority first.
Nice.
But I think recognizing that kind of stuff about yourself can go a long ways.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
So what are we going to talk about next week?
Yeah, so we're going to be continuing this sermon series for the next 2 weeks. And Sunday, we're really going to be focusing on the quality of our giving, basically. And I mean that in the instance of what is going on in our minds and in our hearts when we are doing the actual act of giving alms, giving, not just to the church, but giving to a charity, not just giving of our financial resources, but our time and our talent and our energy, because that's all a part of what stewardship is. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that when we give our alms, we should not let our left hand know what our right hand is doing. And that when we pause to pray, and like this is speaking from a very Jewish world where they had set apart times to pray, there are people that would orient their day that they would end up in some kind of public space at one of the times to pray. And they would throw their hands up and be all loud and boisterous as they were praying so that people would see what they were doing and say, oh my gosh, they're so pious. And Jesus says you have your reward. You are paid in full for what that action was. Because it wasn't about God, it was about you. And so we're going to be talking about what it means to give our treasure to God and to do that from a heart space and do that from a brain space of letting it not be about us.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on the Cut for Time podcast. Join us again on Sunday in person here at the church or online on Facebook Live, and then again on the Cut for Time podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.